Okay. This is Live from the Table, the official podcast of the world-famous Comedy Cellar, coming at you on Sirius XM 99 Raw Comedy, formerly Raw Dog. A change for the better, I think, in terms of names. A little less vulgar. It's also available as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Dan Naturman. I'm with Noam Dworman, owner of the ever-expanding world-famous Comedy Cellar.
Present.
Soon to be adding a room on the corner of 6th Avenue and West 3rd Street. Coming early 25?
This is, we're in February.
We're in Feb 24.
Early 2025, yeah.
Early 25, a beautiful new comedy theater that will set the comedy world in New York City on fire. Periel Aschenbrand joins us as well. We're being joined by Rikki Schlott, journalist Rikki Schlott, in a few minutes. Prior to that, just a couple things. That's probably her. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the passing of a former Live from the Table guest and a staple of the New York comedy scene, Al Martin, who owned the New York Comedy Club and the Greenwich Village. He sold it to Emilio. I don't remember his last name. Emilio's last. Anyway, he no longer owned the New York Comedy Club. He still owned the Greenwich Village Comedy Club right here on McDougal Street. But he was a larger-than-life figure in the New York comedy scene. I know, Noam, you were very fond of him.
Yeah, I liked him very much. He got maybe now that he's died, he'll be more fondly thought of. He got a lot of, I thought, very unfair criticism by the comics over the years. I don't think anybody nobody disliked him, but they were kind of like, I don't know what the word is. I didn't like He was a survivor. He was very successful. He had a lot of rooms. He didn't go out of business. He never cheated anybody, as far as I know. And I admired him. I thought he was, and I liked him. And he was a good family man.
Yeah, that he was. Is Rikki here? Hello,
Hi, Rikki.
How do you do? Rikki has joined us. Rikki is settling in. I would like, whilst she is settling in, I would like to ask what you think of Billy Joel's new song. This is off topic, but Noam's a musician, and I was wondering if he had heard Billy's latest song, Turn the Lights Back On.
Yeah, I heard some of it. I thought it was a disappointment.
Oh, did you? Okay, I like it. I don't think it's exactly at the level of Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, but I think it stacks up well with a lot of the modern, with a lot of the modern pop stuff out there. I think it's pretty good.
This is what I think.
Yeah.
You come sit when you're. No, I mean when you want. I didn't. Sorry. So this is what I think about the song. He hadn't released a song in like 20 years, 15 years,
something like that. Yeah.
And so you expect it to really be powerful, and the song is nice enough, but it's derivative and evocative of other Billy Joel songs. There's a few parts in it.
Yeah, I heard Piano Man in there a little bit.
Yeah, there's one part. If I had a guitar, I could show you. But there's one part where it's da 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 da, and it's like the chords, like if it's in C, it goes to E major, and it's just like it's a very typical Billy Joel device that he's used better in other songs. And I really thought that, well, if he's been sitting on this one song for all these years, and he said, well, now I must release this song, that this was really going to be something special.
Yeah.
It still sounds like a B-side a little bit.
Well,
it was good.
He co-wrote it. He didn't write the song himself. He co-wrote it with some younger people, which may be why it sounds a little more modern than the. We're talking about Billy Joel's new song. I know this is not necessarily your field of endeavor, but you being a young person, and Billy being an old person, I thought maybe it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, but you haven't heard the song.
I haven't. No, I have a very splotchy sense of music taste because my dad is 86 now, so I grew up with like the 50s.
Your dad's 86?
Yeah, and you're Gen Z.
Yeah, I was a late addition to the family.
Wait, talk to your mic. How old are you?
I'm 23, so my dad was 63 when I was born.
Wow. Oh my God, you're like Harry Enton. Harry Enton.
So I just have know a lot of Elvis, and then there's this huge cultural blind spot into like Fergie. It's really embarrassing.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask you a question? Wait, you're going to introduce her first?
I'll introduce her, as we typically do on the show. Rikki Schlott, New York-based journalist, commentator. She has a column in the New York Post, and she is author, along with our friend Greg Lukianoff, of the Canceling of the American Mind. Mm-hmm. And she writes a lot about cancel culture on campus and Gen Z and the problems with Gen Z and we'll get to all that. And Max, you're Gen Z too, right? So
I'm a millennial still.
well, how old are you?
29.
Oh, okay. I don't necessarily know where the demarcation.
So it's 64 is the end of the baby boomers.
I think
65 to 80, right?
I'm not sure where the millennials start, but I know the oldest Gen Zers are born in 97. So they would be like 26.
I'm Gen X. As you clearly see, 65 to 80 is Gen X. That's me in there.
Yeah, 65 to 80, 81 to 96, and 97 to
Well, I would say if you have to squint,
2012.
if you have to
oh, you have it
squint-
up here. I was doing it from memory.
If you have to squint to see it, you're probably Gen X.
Okay, so here's my question,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll talk about politics.
Okay.
I'm 61, and I have young kids. My youngest is 6. My oldest is 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very worried about what it's like for them to have an older dad.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm pretty youthful, I have to say. I mean, I run around and but you know, they still, like, my daughter will comment already, like, oh, Dad, you look older already than you did from the pictures when I was a baby and stuff. So what was it like to have an older dad?
It's complex. My dad is super young and with it. I think I probably have something to do with it. We're like best friends. We're inseparable. I'd say that there's a huge amount of upside, in my opinion, to having like a touchstone of a different generation and different time in my household so immediately. I think it made me more resistant to some of the like generational trends where, I mean, my mom is I share politics with my mom, but I think she might have been a little bit more amenable to like me being like, oh, that's offensive, or we can't say that at the dinner table. Whereas my dad would be like, that's not offensive. Like, since when do we think like that? So I think it definitely grounded me in a way.
Is that why you use the N-word all the time?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Dad. But I would say, I mean, there's also, of course, the complexities of dealing with, I mean, my dad's older than my grandfather, so I'm dealing with the same challenges of an aging parent as my mom is right now. So there's complexity.
Your mom's younger than your dad.
Yeah,
quite a bit.
26 years. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but when you were growing up, when you were a teenager,
Mhm. Yeah.
was it like a drag to have an older dad, or?
Hardly. No, we were like, he would play basketball with me when I was doing the high school basketball team. I was terrible, and he was really embarrassed about it. But like, you know, he's stayed young, he stayed fit. I would say the first time that it really like resonated with me that there was something strange about it was when I moved into my freshman dorm and my dad was like carrying stuff in for me, no problem, even though he was older at the time. And then my roommate's father was in his 40s still, and I was like, oh, this is a little weird. Everyone thinks this guy's my grandpa. And just being in a different context where no one knew me and knew my family, that was the first time that I was like, oh, this is more unusual than I kind of took it for granted to be, because, you know, growing up, everyone knew Ricky's dad's old, whatever. But
You know, I think you mentioned that you might have something to do with your father being youthful. That might be, or it might be that the fact that he was able to have a kid at that age indicates a certain vigor and vitality, such
That's
that,
true.
you know, so who knows what the
It's not as old as you think, Dan. 61, 60. She conceived when he was 62, maybe. I don't know. Around.
well, I don't know how
that. You know, a man at 62 is still
able
still got
to.
it.
Okay.
I don't know about 87, but 62 they stay.
They're still able to. Okay, well, that may be, but well, I'm not too far away, you know. But although I look good, I'll acknowledge that. But surely, as a kid, though, when did it hit you? You know, because when you're real little, I guess you didn't know, but then at some point, you're like, something's not right here. Not that it's not right, but something is different about your father.
I kind of have always known it because my brothers are like in their 60s. I had middle-aged brothers when I was a kid. I had nieces that were older than me and nephews and stuff. And so I just always knew that my family's different, for sure. I mean, it just was a fact of life. It wasn't something that really bothered me too much. I mean, I definitely have I think I had premature anxieties about like mortality and stuff that a child of a much or younger parent would not have had, but that's just life.
Well, I think every child has the fear that, because every child, their parents are old, even if they're young. So every child fears their parents are.
So you and your other siblings have different mother?
Yeah, I'm the only one from my mom, so I'm like her only child, but there's a lot of Schlotts in the world.
And I know this is another no go. Do you find that because you share different genetics that it's like kind of obvious you share different genetics than the siblings, like the differences?
Yeah, I mean, it would be quite a stretch to like pick the two of us out of a room. If one of my brothers were in a room full of people, you'd never be like, that's Ricky's sibling.
What about personality wise?
I think I see how they're like my father in some ways, but yeah, I mean, my brothers and I get along very well, but being like Gen X men and a Gen Z woman, it feels more like an uncle, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess is probably the closest approximate, but not a ton of like glaring similarities between us, to be honest.
So we have a 29-year-old son who is my stepson.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of similar, and I mean, he's nothing like me. It's completely obvious. He's from a different coupling. All right.
Well, by the way, just
Let's
one
get
more
on.
preliminary question. Rikki is short for Richelina?
It's short for Erica because my dad already had Richard Jr. and I was the first girl, so it was a roundabout way to name me after him.
It's
So
cute.
Rikki short for
Well, I think
not
of,
Richard.
I think
Ricky's
of,
a great name for a
I
girl.
think of
right?
Rikki Lake is my only association with the female
Rikki,
Ricky.
don't lose that number as well.
Rikki
That's
lose a
right.
number, yeah.
There's a number. That's because you have an older father. You know that song.
I like those names, like Ricky. We were going to have another kid, turned out to be a boy, but I wanted to name her Josie because she likes
that's
cool,
cute.
like, hey,
Well, that's
Josie.
also- there's
invite Josie, another Steely Dan.
There's
song.
another.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm thinking of the song by the Outfield. Josie's on a vacation.
No, Steely Dan when Josie comes home.
I don't know
So
that one.
good.
Anyway, okay.
You know that song.
I don't know it. Enough preliminary shit. We're here with Rikki Schlott, Gen Zer, that is fighting the good fight against wokeism. What's wrong with your generation?
So many things. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'll leave it to you to.
I mean, I read The Coddling of the American Mind, which my co-author wrote with Jonathan Haidt when I was a freshman in college at NYU. And I found that like what it diagnoses in there in terms of fragility and safetyism, and a sense that like words can wound you and you need to be protected, and just this crippling like undercurrent of anxiety and depression in my generation. When I read that book, it felt like sociologists like looking in and diagnosing all these things that I'd seen the symptoms of, but I couldn't quite figure out like what was up with the general cultural trends that way. And I think if I were to diagnose what's wrong with my generation, I would say that book is probably like the best start. It's how this second book came to be because I'd been so impacted by it. But I would say quite a lot. I think that in a lot of ways we're the victims of a culture that has generally shifted away from free speech norms and classical liberal norms. And we're the first generation to be really born into a post-liberalism world, and where like a liberalism is rampant on campuses and places that should be bastions of free speech and should teach you to think for yourself and should teach you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps or be enterprising. And yet we've been taught the complete opposite of that in a victimhood mentality. But so many of our parents don't really inculcate those free speech values, or they take for granted that we're being raised in a way where classical liberalism is taught to us, where sticks and stones are taught to us, but it's quite the opposite in practice.
Describe for people who may not know. We don't have this, I don't know who listens to us, but what do you mean by classical liberalism?
Like the old
I almost
idioms.
insulted the audience, so I take it back.
Well, I think like the old idioms of a free speech
For
culture
Periel's
that-
fans, go ahead. sorry.
No worries. The old idioms of like a free speech culture that I think were really ingrained in American society until recently, like sticks and stones and to each their own, and everyone's entitled to their own opinions, which were just part of the American ethos until very recently. And I, a lot of things I'll talk to my mom about. Like I'm so amazed that I didn't understand the philosophical value of free speech until I taught it to myself during the pandemic, reading John Stuart Mill, which I'd never been assigned before in college. Or I'll bring things up to her about like anti-fragility, and she'll be like, yeah, I thought that was just like the world that you were growing up in. I didn't understand that when you went off onto this college campus or this high school campus, that it's completely inverted, and that you're taught that you're a victim, and that you're taught to look at people through the lens of oppressor and oppressed. And so, I think a lot of it is just an older generation that wasn't totally aware of just how distorted those classic American values have become in our culture today.
We actually had Jonathan here a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about the impact of social media on your generation, I guess, and even younger.
Younger.
But
Generation Alpha? Is that what it's called? Generation
Yeah,
Alpha?
Gen Alpha. I mean, I had an iPhone when I was 10, so I'm like the guinea pig test case for, I guess it came out a couple years before I was 10, but like the first generation of kids or sub-generation of kids who has always been plugged in since day one. Instagram by the time I was 11, so I'm certainly can speak to that too.
Well, what effect do you think that has on that generation that grew up with it?
I think I'm with John that I don't think it's quite as much of a like the screen time itself is causing dysfunction for people, but it's what it's replacing. And when you look at, like up to 8 hours a day that kids are spending on their screens, what would have been there instead? And it might not be that they're doing something so terrible online. They could be, but they would have otherwise been outside playing with their friends or socializing in a normal way or doing normal rites of passage. We know kids are having less sex, that they're not getting driver's licenses, that they're staying in, that they're not socializing with friends in person. I think that a lot of all those things are kind of a formula for just a normal childhood and growing up into adulthood. And I think that a lot of young people are stunted as a result of that kind of replaced time.
Well, regarding less sex, it'd be hard to have less than I did as a teenager, but I would think that I would think that social media is very helpful. It would have been a godsend to a guy like me who is just a lot better. And I have a joke about that, about sending a text and being a lot more confident than I would have ever been in person or with Instagram and Bumble and Tinder. This is a godsend to the shy people that can flourish whilst behind a screen and be more.
Yeah, but haven't you ever heard of rejection therapy and stuff, and how actually you have to get yourself out there to be able to comport yourself normally in social situations? Imagine if you'd had for as long as you've been dating, you had something to fall back on where you don't actually have to build up the guts to go approach a woman at a bar and you have to do a texting back and forth. And
yeah, but I still haven't developed that skill.
Well, because you'd be even worse if you were a Zoomer.
As a comedian, also, because I'm on stage, and I let them come to me even before Bumble and Tinder and this stuff. I would let them come to me after a show. Now, not that they all came to me after a show, but if they happened to come, then I would be. I still am not confident. I still can't, just approach anybody that hasn't.
I saw the statistic recently that it was something 56%. I'm fudging the numbers, but it was a little more than half of men under the age of 30, 18 to 30, had never approached a woman in person, which doesn't surprise me at all. But I also don't think that that's healthy for a culture or entrusting dating apps with algorithms and all of their complexities to matchmake for an entire generation. I don't think is a good thing.
Are you allowed to still approach a woman in person?
No.
You're not allowed to.
It's and it
Not
never
without
happens.
asking consent.
No, you can approach her. At some point, if she says no, maybe you try one more time. I mean, at some point it becomes harassment. Hey, would you like to get a cup of coffee? Oh no, thanks. I'm not really interested.
Please.
How
about tomorrow?
Now, at some point, I don't know what that point is. You become like a harasser.
Mm-hmm. There's certainly a point, but I think.
Are you single?
I am.
Now, what do you get upset if a man approaches you?
No, certainly not. But I have even some of my female friends who share politics with me will be put off by that. It's really stigmatized. I think growing up with dating apps and never having to actually, statistically speaking, it's a better use of your time to be on the crap or swiping through people rather than just taking a gamble that someone that you approach is single. And I think an entire generation just grew up with that crutch, and now it's stigmatized to even do it the other way around, which is crazy. I don't think that's healthy. I do think there's a pendulum swing coming though. I know people who are doing speed dating and want to meet in person, but it's it's totally chilled. Nobody is just walking up to anyone cold unless it's an exceptional circumstance in my
I suppose that a guy that was blessed with the ability and the confidence to do that would stand out. For a lot of women, they'd be like, wow, this guy's really,
quite possibly.
For some women,
yeah, I think my friends fall into two categories where they're always perturbed by anyone approaching them, or there's always saying I wish that people would approach me. I actually have some female friends who are doing it now themselves, but that's
good. Have we somehow backed into a more sexist age than we had prior, where women, we don't come out and say it, but we're protecting women much more than we used to. Nobody's going to say a woman can't approach a man. That's not even on the table.
Yeah.
Of course a woman can approach a man.
Yeah.
Of course a woman can try to kiss a man.
Mm-hmm.
But women, more than any time in my lifetime, there's this assumption that they have to, it's not equal. They have to be protected from all sorts of things. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think that I certainly take issue with a lot of third wave feminism, sort of protectionism and stuff. And I do think that there's a weird kind of undercurrent of misogyny in a lot of that as well, as though women can't handle themselves or gracefully handle a rejection if somebody is not someone that they're interested in who approaches them. Or that, I mean, I think that there's tons of excesses in the Me Too movement. I do think that the original iteration of it was necessary, but the pendulum has swung way too far. I think due process has gone out the window, and like a lot of the.
Did you say due process? Dun dun dun. No, there's a big issue now, big due process issue going on.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to talk about it
Well,
yet, but I'm gonna talk about it.
all right, do it.
No, I'm not. You know what? You have feelings about? I'm so upset about this.
You mean somebody that got fired without due process?
Yes.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think
But-
I know
but-
what you're talking about, and I think it's.
But we can open up the issue more generally
Well,
and just
you can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll refrain from Streisand affecting it because I think that that's possible at this point because it's so early. But I would say
you lost me with the Streisand effect.
there's a term back.
You
in
know
the
what the
day-
Streisand effect
Wait, is that the thing where
There's
everybody
like-
thinks they remember something but they don't?
No,
No.
it's like Barbara Streisand. There was some like guy taking photos for some random thing that no one has ever heard of like beach erosion in California, and then Barbara Streisand found out that her estate was like in one of the photos. It was like a large scale photo, and then she tried to like sue him or retaliate or get him to take that photo back. And then that photo was like the cover of every freaking tabloid ever because she
Okay.
didn't want anyone to see it. And so now everyone knows about this photo that no one would ever have known about before.
I would just say to any Jewish celebrity that might be listening, would you stop suing and making us look bad?
Why'd
but-
you laugh? Okay.
And Schlott sounds like a Jewish name, but she's not.
So
Is it the two crosses?
It's
anyway?
I guess it's German, I suppose.
It is German.
I thought you were afraid of vampires. I
don't want to like call attention to this.
well, actually,
specifics
so
of it,
let's
we can talk about the issue more generally.
one second. So let's pause at the Streisand effect because one of
Okay.
the things that I'm grappling with on this issue is
Yeah.
I'll say what it is because that
Mhm.
You're
was
fine.
suspended at the Atlantic is that in the nervousness about amplifying it,
No one's standing up for him.
we're going to allow they're
Yeah.
going to amplify it. His
Yeah.
detractors are going to amplify
Yeah.
and establish the narrative
Yeah.
before we even gotten out of bed,
Mhm.
and then it will be hard to push back. And so the concern about the Streisand effect, it has to start with the assumption that, well, if I don't say anything about it, this is just going to disappear, and I don't think it's going to. So that's why I'm torn about.
Well, I know there was an ongoing investigation with the Atlantic, and that they've not cut ties with him permanently.
they did?
They've suspended publishing him until the investigation has concluded. Which I think, I mean, the
Did
headlines
they say
were
investigation?
It's an
Yeah,
internal
It's an
investigation.
internal investigation. The headlines were definitely misleading on it. Like the headlines of, I think there was a Mediaite article that said that they cut ties, but like they say in their official statement that they've suspended publishing him until the investigation is finished. But I'll tell you, like, my thoughts on this. First of all, I read the original essay in which she accuses him. I think that there's a lot of questions about like how reliable that narrative can be. I think it's a gray area, kind of he said, she said situation. I wasn't in the room. I'm not going to comment on what the like lines were crossed or what weren't. However, like the HR department of the Atlantic is not a police department, and we can't expect like HR people to be able to 2.5 years later figure out what happened in this room. And we also shouldn't expect that like they should be the only arbiters of justice, or that, I mean, this isn't even his full-time employer. I think that the entire thing is concerning to me. I think Believe All Women is actually really detrimental to women who are victims of sexual assault and who feel concerned about coming forward, because there have been so many examples of, I don't know. I don't think it sets a terrible precedent.
I mean,
the public shaming element, there's no due process in any of it.
I think we could change it to listen to all women, and that's valid. Listen to what they have to say. Don't
Yeah.
dismiss them, but don't
I mean, but-
believe them without some sort of, evidence.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I'll get shit for this because there's always the counter argument of like how many rape cases get closed by police, or a lot of them end up just being inconclusive. But I do think that there needs to be an impetus to actually involving law enforcement in a timely manner, rather than all this time later expecting that somehow people at the Atlantic who are not law enforcement are going to be able to figure out a true picture of what happened at that point in time. Like it's a very complicated, messy situation. I think
It's a problem, I think, with no great solution because a lot of women don't come forward for various valid reasons. And
yeah, I just
and-
don't think
Did come
coming
forward.
forward on Twitter and screenshotting your email when there's an
Can you
ongoing
find the Atlantic
investigation.
statement? It says about freelance. So, well, look, I agree with you very much. We can't have a world where our livelihoods, and it's more than our livelihood, it's our ability to exist in polite company
Mm-hmm.
hang on the honor system.
Yeah. No, absolutely we can't. And I mean, I say this all as a woman who's been like the target of unwanted sexual advances many times in my life and have dealt with it in my own time. Like I'm not naive to the issue. It's an issue. And I think that there should be recourse where it's due and where it's necessary. But I think that this sort of example is just it's scary. I mean, I think it has also a chilling effect on just people in general and their interactions with each other. Like it almost there's like this cloud of like doom that if you do or say the wrong thing, it could be used against you, particularly in the world of journalism. It's just feels like a lot of people like cafeteria level, like gossiping and people at their different tables just ready to tear down the person at the opposite one on Twitter whenever anyone accuses anyone of anything.
There are, did you find the statement from the Atlantic?
I think so.
Don't-
We are aware of the allegations concerning.
Is that the whole statement? I want the whole statement.
Right.
Say it in a statement. No, go put it back. It says said, that hyperlink, said in a statement. See
I'll read
Click,
it.
click where it says said in a
well,
statement.
I have to squint to read it. So Rick,
Find the statement. Okay.
I can
once
find
you
it.
find it, let me know.
Uh.
So,
Keep going. Yeah, that wait, up right here. Stop. No, down where it says Anna Bros. We're aware of the allegation concerning a freelance contributor to The Atlantic. We take such allegations seriously. The accused freelance contributor is not an employee of The Atlantic. We have not published any new work by the freelance contributor since being made aware of the allegation, and we suspended our relationship with the freelance contributor last month when we first learned of the accusation. We will, of course, be following any potential new developments in this matter.
yeah, that's why. So I didn't say they're investigating. And I don't think they are. I don't know. But so there are, and there's a lot more to this story that I mean, there's a lot more. People should go online. There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to tell you off mic some of the other stuff. But there are tough cases where stories are very old, where I can't think off the top of my head, but for various reasons, the law seems like not a perfect fit and somehow an unfair way to shunt somebody to prevent somebody from getting justice. However, this case is not old. It's about 2 years old. She has full recourse of the civil system or the criminal system should she want it. She doesn't appear to be shy about speaking about it because she's written thousands of words about it and done
then
2 or 3.
A month later, followed up when that didn't catch on.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
then named him. Yeah, no,
And
I think there's definitely a public shaming element, and I think there was a deliberate attempt to bring the Atlantic in a way that wasn't necessarily proper or fair by screenshotting an email that she sent to their editor-in-chief and named him and his full name and stuff, and and it points the finger and it is it about justice or is it about public shaming, and what even is justice in that circumstance? I'm not sure, but it doesn't feel like a
It really so let me be very clear. I'm very agitated about this issue. So I know him. We know him.
Mhm.
I've been friends
do
with
too.
him. We're not buddies, but
Right.
I've known him and I've socialized with him, and I will tell you, people who know me over the years will know that what I'm saying is true. It really has almost nothing to do with my feelings about this case. I've been almost equally upset about other cases of people I'd never met.
Mhm.
There is a basic principle at stake here, which is that what I said, you just can't live in a world where people can choose not to use the institutions which are the envy of the world, by the way,
Yeah.
that we've set up that can compel testimony, put people under oath, subpoena the cell phones, find out what she said to her friends, what he said to his friend, whatever it is, and as best as humanly possible, reach a conclusion here, and then determine punishment
In a similar way.
No, well, with the credibility of objectivity and of the government, as I said, no, I don't want to do any of that. This is much easier.
Yeah.
I'll tweet, and I'll accomplish exactly what I was hoping to do through the lawsuit because I don't really want the money. I guess
Or you don't want the burden of proof.
Yeah,
Potentially.
and that the Atlantic, who has written and published articles criticizing exactly this, just folded like this,
Well,
where they could have. I had a situation like this once in my organization. It was more complex than the Atlantic faced because it was someone who worked for me. She doesn't work for the Atlantic. And without going into the details, the facts were immediately difficult. And I said to her, listen, I can't adjudicate this, but you can get in my car right now and I will take you to the 6th precinct. I know the people there and I'll be able to walk you in and you can, and I'll make sure that you can handle this. And she declined. And then, and I weighed on me. And then a month later, I saw them making out at the bar. And a year later, they had a child. Now, that is not to say that she wasn't raped. Stranger things have happened, right? I really don't know. But I thought it was quite a good illustration of why it was that I did the right thing. Imagine I had fired him. And by the way, and the Atlantic, I mean, this is your interview and I'm talking, but the Atlantic is quite aware of what downstream of that. It's not just, it's like if I let a comedian go because he raped somebody.
Yeah.
Every club, word gets around, right? It's not like, it's really his entire thing is going to go. And then imagine that happened to him. And then actually he ends up in a relationship with a woman. This is crazy, right?
Well, I would just say two things. Number one is if what she's saying is true, then she has a right to tweet it.
Of course, she has a right to tweet it.
And
not about her. It's about the.
Well, I understand that.
Let's just presume, for the sake of argument, she's telling the truth.
Okay,
none of this has to do with me wanting to question anybody.
I'm just saying that I don't want to dump on her because she didn't go to the police.
I'm
and
dumping on the Atlantic.
I'm not saying you.
Yeah.
I'm saying I'd like to just state my opinion is that if somebody rapes you, you can tweet it, you can go to the police, you can do whatever you want. Fuck that guy.
All right.
As far as what the Atlantic did, that's a different matter. The Atlantic, I agree with you regarding the course of action that the Atlantic takes because the Atlantic doesn't know the truth. She knows the truth. The Atlantic does not.
The Atlantic also could never know the truth. That's just it's insane to expect them to be able to years later between two people with a ongoing relationship with one another. There's no way that, it wasn't like some dramatic event where there's physical evidence that she gathered or anything like that. I think also we underestimate as a culture what these sorts of accusations, whether or not they're founded, like what this he said, she said sort of situation, what that does to women in the workplace. I think that there's a meaningful consequence where women are treated sometimes like they're a liability or a danger. And I understand why men sometimes they don't want to take a meeting alone with a female colleague in the way that they might a male colleague, or they might feel a little bit more nervous. I mean, I think that you can feel the tension and the stigma sometimes in workplace settings because of that, which I think that's not healthy for society either. That's not healthy for gender equality. That's not healthy for men and women being able to work side by side with each other with the reasonable expectation that, there's due process if anything were ever to happen with the kind of ambient threat of sexual dynamics in a workplace. But, I think that women suffer as a result of this too, for sure.
Well, I've never had the fear of taking a meeting alone with a woman, but I do know people do
Yeah.
that. I do know that's a good thing.
I've been invited to meetings with HR people there because and I get why some young men, especially in leadership positions, just don't want to be put in a situation where there's not a third pair of eyes there. I get it.
Okay, but the pendulum often swings far in the
Yeah.
other direction. When I was your age and I was, trying to get writing jobs, I would walk into meetings in Hollywood and I wasn't connected. I didn't know anyone. I was hustling my way into this industry. And I would walk into a meeting of a room full of guys and the guy in charge would look at you and, would say something like, "Oh, I didn't know they made hot writers." And everybody would laugh. And it really wasn't funny.
Absolutely.
Now, like, I have
Yeah.
a thick skin, okay? But it's not okay to do that. And
Not to a woman. To a man, it would be okay.
nobody's going to do that to a man.
Yeah, that's true.
I
mean-
mean, it's 100%. I agree with you. I think Me Too corrected on things, but then course corrected in a way that we still haven't figured out where that.
I
healthy
agree.
medium is.
I agree with that 100%. I think that there is some middle ground here
Yeah.
that's fucking reasonable, and that's not it, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, my first job in the media was with Megyn Kelly, who was like the OG Me Too person, and I totally respect that. I think that there was stuff going on in the workplace that I'll never, or hopefully never, have to encounter just by the coincidence that I wasn't working like pre-2017.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I mean,
100%.
We're glad for that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Although I think I'm just super not glad with the overcorrection, or the fact that not even the original overcorrection, but the fact that we're now like, this has been going on for years. Cancel culture has been a thing for years. I feel like we were at a cultural point where maybe we were starting to realize that due process was necessary because everyone was getting torn down right, left, and everywhere. And then something like this can just randomly happen again. Like, it feels like 2018. Like, what happened to the last 5 years?
What if any?
Can I say? I'm sorry. Just because I believe, and you might know at least as much or more than what I know about this. That world is very incestuous.
Mm-hmm.
These are all friends of friends, and they know each other. And this decision that they're making is really not not an objective decision. It's really because there's also, it's a personally pressured decision by this person who knows that one and this person. So with it, she's telling the truth, whatever. And it's the most cowardly. It's just the most, and exactly what you said is right. It's things were seeming to get a little bit in order. People were seeming to get some perspective on the excesses and the benefits of what we've been through, and kind of shedding some of the excesses and
the Aziz and Ansari sort of stuff that we thought was in the past,
and arriving at a sensible, positive outcome. And this is just huge setback. It's like you have a scab, it's almost, and then you just pick it off. It's got so upsetting. Sorry, Dan.
Oh yeah. So I mean, by the way, this issue keeps coming up. Every however long, every couple of years or whatever, or even more frequently. It happened with Shane Gillis. He had, SNL was pressured. Probably they didn't really feel outraged, I don't think, about what Shane Gillis said, but they fired him because they felt pressure. And Louis, Netflix felt pressured. They let him go. And so the question keeps coming up: to what extent should a business, cut ties with somebody, not because they're morally outraged, but because they have stockholders, they have their own bottom line to worry about, they have, they're making a business decision. And Noam, we've discussed this, like, who would you let on stage if you knew that, rightly or wrongly, the audience would be outraged?
Well, two things. First of all, it's there may be overlap, but it's not good to conflate situations where we know what happened with situations where we don't know what happened. In some of the examples you gave, we knew the facts, and how should the business react knowing the facts? And this is another case where nobody knows the facts, and they're just going to allow not anonymous, but a very undetailed, fuzzy accusation to decide.
Well, it's a long, detailed article, but the content,
there's not many
even the
details
content
in the article.
I think is it's so like gray area, he said, she said stuff that it's impossible even with this like thousands of words long essay to understand fully what happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't call the article detailed as to the facts at all.
Yeah.
It's detailed about her feelings and about political statements and
The
blah, blah, blah.
aftermath, yeah.
But we don't even know the most basic facts. Like the first questions that would pop into your mind when I told you a story, you could not find them in the article. The same that we would all have.
But
So
yeah, sorry.
my feeling is that there are some tough cases, but my feeling was all along, and this was contrary to the advice that I got at the time when Louis came back, but it proved to be true, that if you have a strong, principled argument to make as to why what you're doing is the right thing to do, people will back down. And by the way, as you said, most of them don't even care to begin with. There's a huge, like, I always used to joke, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Like, Twitter really is like the Wizard of Oz. There's these, 50, 100,000 people on Twitter that make you feel like the whole world is coming down on you. And actually, the lines around the corner for the Comedy Cellar were never affected even a little bit. So the first thing is, don't jump to the conclusion that it's going to hurt your business. It probably won't.
Yeah.
And second of all, as a leader, you do have the ability to persuade people. Like when in this case that we're talking about now, if the Atlantic had written a paragraph, not a paragraph, but like one of these open letters about it, or just an essay explaining it, they have very, very powerful arguments they could make. By the way, drawing on the arguments that have already been made in the Atlantic, because the Atlantic has published articles skewering all these notions. They published some pretty good anti-cancel culture, Me Too, not skeptical, whatever the right adjective, but definitely they publish articles defending this rush to judgment for certain men who have been accused and whatever it is, and they could certainly just point to their own things, and then if it got too hot, they could back down. They don't have to throw in the towel.
You've often said, when you start going down this road, like, where does it end? Like, anybody can accuse anybody of anything, right? Like, I have no idea what happened with and that woman in that room, but that's beside the point, right? It's like, if just accusing somebody of something is enough to get them fired, derail their career, I mean, it's insane, right?
Let's think of it by analogy for a second. Then I want to talk about the SATs. Your livelihood is money. And then, of course, you could put a price on maybe it's a higher price, as I said before, on your ability to exist in the polite company of your people, of your milieu.
Yeah.
Now, your bank account is money too. There is no way we would ever support any kind of society where somebody could touch your bank account as punishment without due process of law. No way.
In Canada, they kind of did with the truckers.
Yeah, in Canada. Well, and it's an outrage, right?
Yeah.
In America, like, well, that's your bank account.
Yeah.
Nobody can touch your money. And the thing is, what I'm saying now ought to appeal to liberals, because liberals are the ones who normally support ownership in your job, union rules, no union contract, whatever allows somebody to get fired like this, right? This highly skeptical of at-work employment, highly skeptical of the notion of freelance and gig economy. They want freelancers to have all the protections of employment. So philosophically, they're going to resort to things now. He's a freelancer. They can fire for any reason that they always stood against. And in the end, they're creating this alternate system where somebody can take your bank account. They're going to take all your bank account constructively with zero recourse and zero process. And they're going to pat themselves on the back for doing it. Isn't it great that we've made an end run around all these things that we now all you want to do is ruin somebody is tweet to the employer, and then we expect the employer. And then the final thing I say, and because I'm seeing this firsthand, and what's so foul about the atmosphere is that actually, I would say not just a majority, I'd say 80-90% of the people working at the Atlantic think this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And they're afraid to say so.
Yeah.
So you can't even, so even if you could have an inquiry into truth here, you can't, because the people you would need to speak truthfully are afraid of getting in trouble for saying the wrong thing. So you can't even have an open hearing, as it were, within that universe, because within that universe, only one side is really allowed to speak freely.
Yeah. And
it's awful. So.
And I think this industry is particularly sensitive to that, because so much of it is built off of reputation and like taking moral stances and stuff. And if there's one even question about your ethics or your personal character, like it can be impossible to come back from that, unless you want to come back as like the distorted, I've been canceled and now I'm in my echo chamber with the people that I brought with me to my little corner of the internet. So it's scary. I'm completely with you. I've
And these are the same people who write all these articles. Like they just, they just pointing their judgmental fingers at any politician who, buckles for Trump, or like anytime somebody acts in their own self-interest in a cowardly way. This is like, half of what they write about these politics. And then the second they have to make a tough decision, show some backbone, they fold.
Yeah.
And they're not politicians, they're journalists. Yeah. This is a profession that's supposed to be the opposite. We understand politicians. Their oath is to re-election, right? That's what they do. But journalists' oath is supposed to be a principle. Now, hopefully politicians have a little bit of that too, but they're not supposed to. Journalists are supposed to stand for something more. Jeffrey Goldberg is supposed to stand for something more. Okay. Dartmouth reinstated the SATs.
Yeah. I'm all for it. I think that's great.
Because I don't have kids, so what was the situation with the SATs to begin with?
During 2020, I mean, there had been the background of a lot of agitation, particularly like in the Ibram X. Kendi anti-racist world, that disparities in average SAT scores on the group level was indicative of the fact that the SAT itself, or that standardized testing itself, was in itself racist. And that had been a debate that had been happening in like the op-ed section of the New York Times for a while, but I don't think people had taken it so seriously that it could actually come out into the open. But then the pandemic happened and all these schools suspended the SAT or requirements for the SAT and went test optional. I think understandably at first, because you don't want like a bunch of kids in some super spreader event like taking tests in March for the next application cycle. But then they never put it back. And like a lot of schools, like Harvard, for example, already until the class of 2030, there's no SAT requirement. And it was the single, in my opinion, objective standard or numerical standard that schools had to go by, considering that GPAs don't really mean anything anymore because everyone gets an A. Like the average GPA went from like roughly like 3.2 to like 3.3 over like the course of 5 years or something crazy, because we all need gold stars apparently in my generation. So I have no idea when it comes down to these ultra selective schools and picking between two kids with great grades and great essays that their parents could have written, and extracurriculars that some $100,000 a year college counselor could have picked for them. Like how could these schools possibly differentiate between these perfect on paper kids except for bystander?
What about the AP exams? Is that also thrown out the window?
I don't know if there's still there was not a requirement for APs when I applied.
But certainly, yeah, like you could, like if somebody got a 5 on the Calc BC, you could be pretty sure that this is a pretty smart cook.
Yeah, I don't know that they were never required though.
I think I got like a 2.
But yeah, no, it's unimaginable to me. I mean, I applied to colleges in like 2017. The idea of not having taken the SAT was so remote, and now there's going to be like years and years of kids that did not have that requirement in place. But Dartmouth, to their credit, actually did an internal study. The new president asked for it, and they found that it was kids in the kind of cusp case by case situations where kids from disadvantaged backgrounds whose SATs may not have been as high as the average at Dartmouth, which I will 100% agree that if you have the money for SAT prep and tutoring and stuff, like you can raise your scores. There is a degree of privilege in that.
But only by so much. From the literature suggests maybe 50 to 100 points.
Yeah, something like that. But I think that there's important context, like an SAT score. A kid who has by far the highest SAT in an inner city school should be considered a little bit differently from a kid who went to a prep school and has the same score potentially. And the Dartmouth study found that it was precisely those kids who weren't sure, their SAT score was a little lower than average, so they decided to withhold it, and then they got rejected because the admissions counselors couldn't see that whole holistic vision of them. So it was the people that it was meant to help that it was hurting most, and yet most schools are still going forth with this test optional policy.
So, I mean, I agree with you 1,000%. So I think the schools want, especially after this recent Supreme Court decision, the schools want to be basically unfettered in their ability to import into their class whatever they want.
Yeah.
And have it to be so fuzzy that nobody can prove that they did anything that they weren't supposed to.
Yep.
It seems to me so obvious, almost to be laughable to not understand this, that standardized tests are the only fair, well, I have one more thing to say about that, but are the only fair apples to apples comparison that you can do among people, because exactly as you say, grades don't mean anything. And of course, some neighborhoods will be smarter than other neighborhoods, actually smarter. And even if the grades were strictly on a curve in each neighborhood, you still don't have apples to apples, because the C in one neighborhood, like I know people went to private schools, competitive private schools. A C plus in those private schools were different than a C plus in my public school, right? And some combination of standardized tests, and I understand this would be have a margin of error, but some measure of compensating for the socioeconomic background profile of that student, such that we know that based on this life experience, as opposed to the rich private school kid, it's probably not fair. So we will have some, multiple to add to it.
Yeah.
As you say, every kid, their parents do their essays.
Yeah.
Every recommendation, their parents' friends write the recommendations. The grades are meaningless. So like what? I mean, so let's get rid of SATs as well. So what are you going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've always been a proponent of socioeconomic affirmative action and looking at people through the lens of contextual excellence. Like I came from the Lawrenceville school. I went to a hoity-toity boarding school, and like I'm very aware of the advantages that come with that, and getting a college counselor when you're like a junior in high school, and having someone who's just built into your day-to-day school life that's helping you and figuring out my mom just randomly applied to schools that she heard of because her parents hadn't gone to college, or her dad did, but they weren't holding her hand through it. And it's like a night and day situation. I completely think there should be a way to say this kid is really gifted and talented, or even this kid's grades might not be awesome, but they were working shifts after school at night, and their SAT is actually exceptional. And I mean, I think it's an attack on meritocracy. I think there's actually the soft bigotry of low expectations at play here. Yeah, I mean, it makes me question even more the value of these degrees and stuff. I mean, I'm taking classes right now at Columbia. I dropped out of NYU, and I'm just taking classes here and there because I got in. I'd like to take John McWhorter's class, and I don't plan to finish my degree in the end. But I don't really know what it means that I got in there, because I mean, I applied with my SAT scores. I was happy with them, but it was optional. And who else is in my class, and how do they even know who these kids are, where they came from?
But you already have accomplishments to.
Yeah, I think the whole educational industrial complex, if you will, is due to collapse anyway. I see the future of more people like Rikki not even finishing school, learning what they need to learn. I think there's going to be less emphasis going forward on that degree, more emphasis on what do you know, what can you do. We see a lot of people in computer science that don't even finish their I mean, Elon Musk, well, he finished Penn, but he didn't finish grad school. But
I think race is obviously our most difficult, intractable issue in this country.
No comments on that? Okay.
Yeah.
If the country were all one race, then it would be a relatively simple matter to agree on a fair way to figure out, but different, you know,
Oh, then I
economic.
feel like we would splinter out into whatever different little nuances we would pick for ourselves. I feel like it's human nature to be tribal. Though.
No, but I would say we're going to have standardized tests, and we're going to help. You know, we're going to take into account that you came from these poor neighborhoods, you
Yeah.
get these rich neighborhoods, and then we would not worry about the final mix because it's, you know. But we're very, very, very afraid of the racial disparities, and by the way, it's a terrible look. It's I don't discount it. And what I've always said, and I think I'm right about this, is that what this country needs to do, and it will solve all our problems, is to focus on grammar school children being up to grade level from kindergarten through the 6th grade.
Yeah.
And I think if we did that, all the other problems would disappear. And if we don't do that, it's ridiculous to think you're going to fix it when they're applying to college. You can't. If you're not on grade level by 6th grade,
Yeah.
you are not going to catch up at Columbia.
Well, what if
Yeah.
what you're suggesting doesn't solve the disparities?
Oh, well, I mean, disparities don't have to disappear.
Do you know Rob Henderson?
No.
He's he coined this term luxury beliefs, which is like he uses it to describe the sort of beliefs that you need to be from a point of privilege to hold them. Like, for example, like defund the police, but I live in a doorman building in the Upper East Side type people who are actively holding views that are counterproductive for the very people they're trying to protect. But that's an aside. He has a memoir that I think it comes out later this month that's about him growing up in foster care and the like fundamental kind of childhood changes that he would like to see in the system that would help people ultimately, which sounds very much like what you're saying. So you might enjoy it.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I mean, if I were to tell you, we said this before, that in the 6th grade, these 10 kids had, you know, were reading at, you know, high school level, and these other 10 kids were reading at 1st grade level. And that, by the way, this is not, or 3rd grade, this is not exaggeration because that's actually what you have there. And say, what do you predict about how many doctors are going to be from this class? I mean, it's obvious that we all know if you think back to your friends when you were young and you knew who the kids were doing, and you see what has become of them as adults, it's almost always completely predictable.
Yeah.
That the smart kids are all, and then the kids who, I don't want to say they weren't smart, but the kids who were not attending to their schoolwork,
Yeah.
and maybe less intelligent, amounted to very little, right?
Yeah. I think there's a disproportionate emphasis put on like college matriculation rates and graduation rates that is not really put upon kids at younger ages for sure.
And can I retract amounted to very little, because that's actually sounds snobby and it doesn't actually reflect the way I think. It amounts to little in terms of the statistics that people are concerned about.
Yeah.
That-
The ultimate outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Absolutely.
I don't look down on them in some way. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
no, that's little. I'm saying that we're worried about these disparities. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
By the way, before you came, Rikki, Noam said to me, "Well, do you have things to ask Rikki about?" Implying that we'd be short of subject matter. But as is typically the case, Noam was more than.
No, I said it because he's a huge fan of yours, and I must be like, is Periel falling asleep? You look like Bill Clinton at a speech. Bill Clinton is a freelance contributor to the Atlantic, in good standing. Dan, there's like 10, 15, 20 emails. Rikki Schlott. Was Rikki Schlott? So I say, well, you must.
Well, yeah. Well, I've also met her in person. And figured
I have too.
She's a friend of the cellar and would be a good fit. And I was right, because this episode was quite good in my estimation.
So what else is on your mind these days?
I mean, this is the first semester that I'm taking classes at Columbia. I got in like a year and a half ago and deferred. And they were like, if you're not coming, you're not coming.
So you don't have a college degree?
No, I dropped out of NYU. Well, actually, I during the pandemic, I was a sophomore, and
Are you a prodigy? How did you become Greg Lukianoff's co-writer when you didn't have a college degree?
Well, Bill Gates ain't got a college degree.
I'll give you the very abbreviated version, but basically, I was a sophomore at NYU. The pandemic happened. I finished my sophomore spring on Zoom. My mom, they didn't give us any tuition break, full tuition for Zoom school for the fall. And my mom was like, yeah, if you do something like interesting and good, I'll float you through one semester financially to take a leave of absence. And then we'll go back when it's normal in the spring, which of course it wasn't.
I wish I didn't have a college degree. I wish I grew up in a sewer. I mean, because
She didn't finish her story.
I thought it was done.
No, I'm just halfway through it. Go ahead.
So I
doesn't
took a
listen.
semester off.
I heard every word.
I took a semester off. I read all the books that had accumulated on my bedside table that I had not read, which I'd been like assigned the Communist Manifesto like 5 times across the first 2 semesters or 2 years I was at NYU, but I'd never read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and it was like a kind of switch flipped in my brain, and I just felt like I had a different understanding of freedom and what it meant to be an American and why it was so precious, and I needed to protect it at the very time that I felt a lot of my freedoms were being kind of trampled upon during the pandemic. And also just in 2020 when it feels like free speech and tolerance went out the window in a lot of ways, and cancel culture went so rampant. So I started submitting op-eds to the New York Post. An editor there picked me up and she became a mentor of mine. And I interviewed Greg for like my 3rd op-ed about whether...
Greg Lukianoff, yeah.
Yeah, about whether Gen
Keep thinking Greg Louganis. Go ahead.
So I interviewed him for like my 3rd article about whether Gen Z could be uncoddled by the pandemic, which the answer is actually no, but I was hoping yes. And so then he offered me a fellowship on that call, and then that fellowship turned into a book, and here I am.
I think to follow up on a statement I had made prior that didn't get a whole lot of traction here on the podcast, I think this is the trend. College, we're going to see a complete collapse. If you want to get an electrical engineering degree, I guess you got to go to college. But for most people, I think it's bullshit, and I think that's how things are going to in the future. Everybody's going to be like Rikki. They're not going to. It's just like if you got the money and you want to hang around and read books and sit under a tree and go to frat parties, then do that. But I don't think employers are going to prioritize it. I predict in 20 years it's going to be completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a value to a classical liberal education, which I just don't think is what's on offer at schools right now. I mean, I don't want to like denigrate the institution entirely, but in its current form, I think it completely is deserving of that. But to your point, and I found an editor at the Post, Margie Conklin, who like took me under her wing and taught me reporting by doing reporting. And then I've decided I'm just going to take this one class, kind of have my little victory lap on an Ivy League campus, and then be an Ivy League dropout. But
and it gives you more street cred. Now you're like, it's a cool thing, I think, to not finish.
No,
school.
it's true. And I've been there for I take one class a week. I think this is like my 3rd one. The second one, I couldn't get onto campus without going through an NYPD checkpoint because the protests were getting so out of control. And I'm like, what is like this? It got worse since I left college campuses. But to your point, the other day I tried to go study in the School of Journalism library because I thought that'd be cool. And my ID bounced because I'm technically an undergrad plebe and I'm not worthy of being in the journalism department where people are learning to do the job that I'm doing, which I think like there's totally a case to be made for apprenticeships and learning by doing, and employers being open-minded to the potential that a kid who maybe went down their own path or took a gap year in part-time school. I think there's so many different routes to success that we're finally opening our eyes to, but it took such a shock to the system of like higher education just totally like self-detonating.
And who
to
did
get
like
there.
sorry, who decided? Like somebody somewhere at some point decided a bachelor's degree means 4 years and this many. But somebody decided that. There's nothing written in stone from Mount Sinai that says that 4 years and X number of credits is a valid education,
Yeah.
and 2 credits less, and you don't have the degree. I mean, who gives a shit? How about can you do the job?
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's generation, he doesn't have a degree. That wasn't like a huge thing. It went from being like a luxury or a privilege or like a plus on your resume to being like a de facto requirement to even participate in polite society. I think it's interesting to see how people like I definitely don't want to be the kid who comes from like the Lawrenceville School and had a great education who's like no one needs to go to college. I think there's huge benefits and the class mobility that it in some cases can provide is completely worth it. And there are fundamental lessons that I was fortunate to have learned at an earlier age just being at one of those types of schools. But I also like I do feel that it's important to like put myself out there as someone who did take a different path and say that that's possible. I'm a huge advocate for gap years. I think I accidentally took one during the pandemic, and giving kids more time to decide what path they want to take and evaluate whether a degree is necessary for it, or what this like gender studies degree actually means in the job market is probably a plus. But I do think that
and take a class in gender studies.
So
Say,
I have a
if you're
theory about
interested.
all this. I have a theory on everything.
Go ahead.
Shut up, Max.
I didn't know, Max didn't say. Did Max say anything?
Hey, lag.
Okay.
My theory is that college. First of all, it used to be very challenging. It was mostly required courses. You had to read Shakespeare, you know, and it was for the smartest people. And so, and it's funny. I was reading Leon Wieseltier interview today because I'm researching his stuff, and he talked about going to college, and this professor enthralled him, and this professor just opened his eye. And I'm like, I never had an experience like that. I never took a class. I just trying to figure out how to get through it, you know. So there are people out there who are awakened by education. They're smart usually, and college was for them. So then college, and these people are very able and they do great things. And then people began to think, oh, because they went to college, that gave them the skills to do that. But this college never had anything to do with them having these skills. They were drawn to college because they were these type of people. I said, well, if it works for them, let's give it to everybody. So they start, but actually that's a little bit too challenging. Not everybody could take Shakespeare. But so then they give it to everybody, and then they dumb down all the courses, and it became meaningless. And now and I know as an employer, I deal with people who are college educated. They can't even write paragraphs. It is now meaningless.
Yeah.
And now people will begin to rethink the whole thing. But like so many things, my father didn't even graduate high school, but he was brilliant. It's not the causation is backwards. It's not that the college made great people. Great people went to college.
Yeah, I would say actually though, I think it's inverted too, where it used to be that the educational system incentivized independent thought and like pushing back on ideas and grappling with them. And now there's what I'm seeing, and maybe it's because of the world that I move in, but I'm seeing that those like exceptional thinkers who want to like push back against something and play devil's advocate and engage with ideas, and who have a love of learning and curiosity and want to look at both sides of an argument, are the exact people who are getting squeezed out of the system right now, because there's such a like Caitlin Flanagan had a great article about this in the Atlantic recently. Right? I love her. About how the new mission of a university professor, it used to be, give you evidence and then you've come to your own conclusion. And now it's completely inverted, where it's like, here's the conclusion and now you go find your evidence to come to it. And that was 100% my experience throughout college. I felt like any sort of dissent was just like, it was social suicide. It was going to hurt my GPA. And you're basically, even at a school like NYU and in all honors classes and stuff, you're basically ascribed, like, as long as you can support the viewpoint that is okay, then you're going to get an A. And that's what I learned to do. I wrote essays that I didn't believe in. I had a final exam essay, like 20% of our grade, which like in-class essay, that I'm going to fudge like the exact quote of it, but it was basically like, disregarding what you know from history, explain why Marx's vision for society is the best possible one. Like how is that an intellectual exercise? And it's definitely no longer teaching you how to think. And I think that the people who are independent original thinkers are exactly the people who get like disgusted by the system. So,
but they are the people who make a lot of money on Substack. No, like there is a big marketplace for these people who think for themselves. Which is very interesting, right?
Totally.
You put any of these run of the mill thinkers on CNN, no one watches them, no one cares. It's just like noise. All right, we got time for one more. What else is bugging you?
Oh gosh.
Or maybe it's not bugging you. Maybe something that you think is okay.
So many things bug me all the time. I think I mean, I'll bring up 2024. I'm like existentially dreading that, and I feel
the election.
And I feel completely failed by both the major political parties and the duopoly right now. And
Would you just write something about kids your age. I don't think kids. Sorry,
Yeah.
young people that are not
Okay.
voting.
Yeah. There's you did your homework.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. There's a considerably lower percentage of Gen Zers who are planning to vote in 2024, and like I completely understand why.
Lower than the historical trend,
Lower
or
than
lower
2020.
lower than 2020.
Yeah. And I think, you know, there's so much disaffection and just like blah. Why should I? If it's two 80-something-year-old candidates who the majority of the country statistically in almost every poll say that they don't want another Trump-Biden matchup, it feels like there's no real Democratic input ahead of the primaries in any meaningful way. And like each party just is profiting from the lack of options on the other side. And so
Is it the same? My gut, I haven't really followed the polls. My gut is that, to my chagrin, Trump voters are happy Trump's the nominee. I mean, they've had choices.
Trump voters, sure, but I mean,
Not Biden voters would prefer a different candidate. The Trump
I
voters
don't
are happy
fully-
with their Trump.
I don't fully agree with that because it's, you know, he's getting like what, 50-60% of the primary voters. And so there's almost half of registered primary Republican voters who don't want him, plus all of the independents who might ultimately compromise and decide to vote for him. And I mean, I have so many people that I know and love who voted for Trump and felt enormously compromised by that decision, but they were like on the fence. And so I do think that there are so many people, including Republicans, who'd be perfectly happy to have someone else.
Yeah, there's some, but let me put it this way. If Biden, he's too old, but let's just suspend his age for a second. If Biden were to lose now in 2024, in 2028, he's not even going to show up on the radar in terms of being able to run for president again. He will have zero support. He will be done.
Yeah.
Trump, he
Trump
vanquished
has
DeSantis, Haley. I mean, real candidates, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like a third of the country who's a registered Republican, roughly, and it's about half of them who are voting for Trump in the primary. So it is still the
you're right.
fringes who get to make these decisions for the rest of the country.
What do you think about Noam?
Wait, I want to say something about Biden. So I've been very slow to accuse him of being senile or dementia. I've been saying for years now that he just seems like an old man. Like I have old people in my family I remember my grandparents, they were never senile, but they would forget where they put the keys. They would forget names.
I
whatever.
would not want my dad to be president right now.
But he's not senile.
No, but you know.
So yesterday there were two things that went up. One is that he confused Macron he said Mitterrand instead of Macron.
Yeah.
Like, well, all right. Mitterrand was president of France for a long time, and they're both M's, and you know, it's tired. That's really didn't faze me. But then it appeared that he couldn't come up with the word Hamas, and he said the opposition, and that made me think, no, that might be a bridge too far for me to excuse. If you're the president of the United States and you can't come up with the word Hamas, I don't see how you're going to be president for 4 years. I don't see it.
But, you know, dementia, certainly a negative, but not a deal breaker necessarily, depending on who's on the other side.
No, not a deal breaker, but
why is this like I'm taking a fundamental issue with the fact that that's what we're left to choose from.
You're
like
right.
Nobody's happy
You're
about that.
absolutely right.
And like the first election I really remember is 2016, and it made me really politically animated out of hate for all of the options before me. But for so many young people who only remember that, like it just makes them think, why should I bother in American politics if no one at the table is even vaguely representative of my own personal interest at all?
Well, Noam takes the point of view that because New York always goes Democratic anyway, he can just stay home in Ardsley and not vote.
It's true.
although those.
I don't have to feel bad about my protest vote, which always goes to some like libertarian candidate.
Yeah, I don't vote, but I'm being urged to register as a Democrat and vote against Jamal Bowman in the primary. People are telling me I need to do that.
That's also another thing that I take issue with too, is that if you're an independent here in New York, you can't vote in primaries.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like, why is almost half of the people who are, I don't know the exact demographics in New York, but like almost half of people identify as an independent, and why should the moderate people be precisely the people who do not have a say in the first go round of an election? Like, they're who you want to be making the decisions.
Yeah, well, the primary system is not good. The smoke-filled rooms were much better.
I know you don't vote, Noam, but I'm perfectly content to allow you to choose how I vote, since you're better informed than me.
I think you need to know everything there is to know, Dan. I don't think there's much about policy that that you would bring to bear in this election. You have two personalities. You have to decide who you think is more trustworthy with his finger on the button. Keep us.
Well, you've said that would be Biden.
I believe it would be Biden. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I guess I'm voting Biden.
No comment.
I mean, I'm not on a policy basis. I'm I definitely lean more towards Trump, who they call a conservative, but is not particularly conservative. But I don't think policy was ever the issue with Trump.
No.
It's him, and he can call Kim Jong-un Rocket Man and get away with that. But I don't know if I'd want that kind of mouthing off in this current world crisis.
Yeah. No,
And I don't know if he'd have the sense not to do it. I don't know.
I agree.
On the other hand, there is the argument that he's so bellicose and unpredictable that maybe that would deter bad actors in the world. You can't rule that out, but you can't assume that either.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it all comes back to what you were saying. It's ridiculous that these are our choices. We shouldn't have to be having this kind of discussion. These are undeterminable issues.
It's hardly feels like a democracy in any meaningful way, the way that it's run right now.
All right, this too will pass. It's one thing. You know what? That's the half empty version of it. The half full version of it is what an amazing country this is. That we can have either of these two bozos, and actually, if you don't get up and read the news. And I felt this way when Trump was president. You probably will not even notice the difference.
That's true.
Even if whatever policies they do, the country is not really about the president. It's about our system. It's about our freedom. It's about capitalism. It's about the dynamism of our population. And so long as something else far away in the world doesn't really upend us, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
Unless something else far away in the world does upend us.
Yeah, there's
which
always that
seems to be
possibility, but-
that very real possibility these days.
But there's no telling which president would, be better. You can take your guess which president would be better than that. I mean, if you look, just said we got to go, but if you look at the things Trump did that his opponents predicted would end in disaster.
Yeah.
Killing of Soleimani, moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Supreme Court, that was a big one.
None of the disasters.
Well,
Yeah.
Roe being
And, like,
overturned was, I guess,
No, I'm talking about on the world stage.
Okay.
On the world stage.
But then, the next day, he's like, maybe we should put the light inside the body to kill the COVID. So, you could let it sit.
Well, he gets a bum rap on that. He actually does because we just had Donald McNeil on the show. So first of all, there is a technology to kill viruses with light. He was right about that. But then what's even worse is he talked about applying the disinfectant directly to the lungs.
Yeah.
If you Google it, you will see at least 2 serious scientific studies where they tested the inhalation of disinfectant, not the injection, but the inhalation, but to see if it would kill. One was for COVID, I think, and one was for the flu. One was ethanol, and one was vinegar or something. So, it was a dumb thing to say. The president shouldn't be riffing on medical technology, but obviously
I stepped in it here, apparently.
It went by. It was like a daytime. Nobody's even listening. His opponents turned it into a huge thing, and then they said, "Isn't this the dumbest thing in the world?" It was like,
What would you? So apropos of everything we've discussed on this show, cancel culture, this sort of thing.
Old dads.
Which president do you think will make any difference in that regard? Either one of them.
In what regard?
In the regard to how do we get beyond this current climate where free speech, the very notions of free speech.
I don't think the president can move it that much. I would say, in retrospect, and again, this is also taking the personality out of it. Hillary Clinton is a good, moderate, sweet spot, I believe, for what would have made a good president, as was Mitt Romney. Years ago, I used to say, I don't even think the people who were supporting Hillary as opposed to supporting Romney even remember what the issues that divided them were. Like, it was $13 minimum wage as opposed to $4. Like, they were such minor issues. But that kind of like common sense middle ground president.
Yeah.
These people who can't even seem to get any support anymore. I don't know. But that, I don't know who listen, these guys are so old. The next generation will take over. I'm very optimistic about America. We're in such better situation than the rest of the world. We can't see it. Population wise, we're better off. Population replacement wise, I mean, we have our issues, but this country is great. We're going to be fine.
I'm very glad to hear that.
Me too.
What's bad? What's terrible is going to happen? There are terrible things. Like, they shouldn't be giving out life-saving medicine based on race. They shouldn't have been making Asians pretend they were white to get into college.
They shouldn't be brainwashing our children to be anti-Semites.
Well, yeah, that's right. They shouldn't be brainwashing our children to be anti-Semites. But our country is self-correcting.
I hope you're right.
I hope so too.
It really is. I mean, do you think there's any, put it this way, do you think there's any time in the last 150 years where if you were having this discussion, you wouldn't have had very serious issues that you could have brought up in this discussion to make the case that we have a lot to be worried about as Americans? We're facing terrible headwinds. The world has always had issues. The country's always had issues. Those issues were much worse and much more dangerous than our issues now. Our parents lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, World War II, Vietnam. Imagine being in Vietnam and all the teenagers are 1 year away, they're going off to die in Vietnam. That's the good old days, right? That's when the country was operating well.
Yeah.
We're doing great.
All right. Thank you, Erica, better known as Rikki Schlott, for joining us. I thought a very instructive discussion. I'm giving myself a pat on the back for
Very good.
requesting Rikki as a guest.
She was overdue. She's
Yeah. Thanks
yeah,
for the invite.
and
It was fun.
she's a friend of our dear friend Michael Moynihan's, I believe.
Camille. I was out with Camille that night, but I
Oh.
do know Michael too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
We
I
should
know
have Camille on the show.
the fifth column guys. Yeah, they're cool. They're fun.
Anyway, her book, The Canceling of the American Mind, and her column in the New York Post. Thank you, Periel. And Maxwell, our magician with the sound. And podcast at comedycellar.com for questions, comments, and suggestions. Bye-bye.